Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present Chayim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and world Jewry is still trying to make sense out of the Israeli elections. I'm sure you know that despite all the Israeli polls indicating Isaac Herzog of the Zionist Union would win the day, lo and behold, either the polls were wrong or Benjamin Netanyahu worked some political magic and was able to turn out a huge vote for Likud that swept him to a rather impressive victory in which Likud won 30 seats, 12 more than the 18 seats Likud had in the prior government, and 6 more than the Zionist Union's 24 seats. Now, for those who adore Bibi and who believe he's the only Israeli statesman able to stand up to the Palestinians and to the Iranian nuclear threat and to a misguided President Obama, and that he's the only Israeli with the stature and the gravitas and the eloquence needed to represent Israel on the international stage, Mr. Netanyahu's dramatic last-moment victory is celebrated with enthusiasm. But for others in the Jewish community, in Israel and in the United States, there's some real concern with the way in which Mr. Netanyahu framed his campaign at the last moment. So a great deal of attention is being focused now on some of the statements he made in the closing moments of the election, referring to the Arab-Israeli vote, and to his position on a two-state solution and on settlement expansion. Evidently, in a last-minute effort to generate as large a turnout as possible, Mr. Netanyahu warned the Israeli electorate that a large Arab-Israeli vote could threaten the security of the State of Israel, and that it was in the interest of Jewish Israelis to turn out to vote against the left and against Arab parties. And this year's voter turnout was the highest since 1999 for both the right-wing and the left, right-leaning and left-leaning parties. And very well, the turnout on the right exceeded that on the left, and Mr. Netanyahu won. But Mr. Netanyahu's strategy really seemed to work. It did get out the vote for Likud, which received votes from Israelis who had never voted before for Likud. And Mr. Netanyahu's hard line on the two-state solution and on settlements, saying that there would be no two-state solution if he became prime minister again, and that he would continue settlement building. This seemed to resonate with the Israeli people. It's as if the electorate would be, we were told that this year's election would be determined by domestic issues, the high cost of living, the way it's almost impossible for a young Israeli family to afford an apartment, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. In the end, it seemed that Mr. Netanyahu's message really resonated when it came to taking a hard line on Arabs and Palestinians and on Iran. Well, as you might imagine, Mr. Netanyahu is taking significant criticism from the Jewish left in Israel and here in the United States. And the Obama administration is now threatening to modify its stance on Palestinian statehood in the United Nations because of Netanyahu's apparent abandonment of any negotiations with Mahmoud Abbas. Well, what's it all mean? And what will the nature of Mr. Netanyahu's victory mean for the standing of the State of Israel among American Jewry and on the world scene? For some answers, I am so pleased to be joined by a wonderful panel of individuals who bring a very special both perspective and insight into these issues, all from their own vantage point. It's always a wonderful pleasure to be joined by the outstanding author of 14 books a woman who's been in the forefront of feminist issues since the late 1960s and who's become a leading expert in the area of resurging anti-Semitism, Phyllis Chesler, author of The New Anti-Semitism. I'm also pleased to be joined by Oren Heiman, chairman of Moatzah Mekomit of New York, an Israeli council representing roughly 150,000 Israelis living in the greater New York metropolitan area. And Oren just returned from Israel, where he voted in this election. Jonathan Mark from the Jewish Week, the outstanding journalist who writes a weekly column, and he is one of the most brilliant journalists on the Jewish scene today. And Micah Halpern. We're so pleased to be sitting with him once again, author, syndicated columnist, who writes the online Micah Report and who hosts his own weekly series here on JBS, Thinking Out Loud. I thank all four of you for taking the time to join us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Phyllis, you heard some of the things I said in the open. I am so interested in hearing, first of all, when you look at this victory, how did Netanyahu win? What do you think really turned the tide for him?
Baruch Hashem is the first. All right.
You're very happy he won.
I am.
Because?
And by the way, I am not upset that finally an Israeli leader said what the Palestinian leadership has been saying, lo, these many years, we don't want a two-state solution. We won't work with you. We want to annihilate you. Finally, he said this, right? And now, of course, when the Palestinian leaders, Yasser Arafat, who turned down a very generous deal, and Mahmoud Abbas, who did likewise, when Bibi says it, the whole world is jumping on his bones. Obama has played a diabolical role, a shameful role, by not only putting down State Department taxpayer money to interfere with a sovereign country's election, and then Bibi is blamed for the strained relationship with this very
Okay, you're saying so many things I want to talk about, but I want to take them one at a time.
All right.
One at a time. How did he win?
How did he win? I think it was the security. People remember Gaza of last summer. I'll never forget it, and I wasn't even fighting there. I was covering it from afar. So the terror tunnels, nuclear Iran, the genocidal intentionality of the very state that Obama is making merry with. I think these were the two top issues that even were more important, that trumped the very important issues of the price of apartments, the nature of the economy, inequalities of all kinds, and the nature of democracy. Because if you aren't going to survive, all the rest is commentary.
Oren, I'm fascinated. You literally got in a plane from New York, flew to Israel to vote in the election, correct?
That is correct.
How long did you fly?
Couldn't get a direct flight, so flew through Moscow. I think it was 37 hours.
Oh.
How long were you in Israel?
6 hours.
Where in Israel, by the way?
Where did I vote, or where did I
where?
land? I voted in Petah Tikva, where my wife's family lives,
Okay. And then you get on a plane and come back.
and got on a plane and came back.
Okay. Phyllis is very, very happy that Netanyahu won. Do you share her joy?
Well, I think that Israel shares her joy, or at least what I share the joy of is that we had a real democratic process, even more than in the past. The losers in this campaign, except for one small cry that I read about this morning, were not claiming that there was forgery and that was illegality relating. So I think democracy won on one perspective. I think the fact that the Meretz party, the watchdog of liberals and Democrats in Israel, was very close to possibly first time in Israeli history not past the new threshold.
It barely survived, though.
Barely survived. This morning it turns out that it wasn't even 4, it was 5 MKs, so Zahava Galon is still in, which I think is good news for people who think that the checks and balances in Israel are and should maintain where we have a strong Supreme Court. In addition to the other human rights and treatment of Palestinians, etc. And on the other hand, the one party that was expected to pass the new very high threshold of Israeli elections and didn't pass was Yachad, was the branch off of Shas, Eli Yishai and Baruch Marzer and Yoni Shedbon, who were possibly the reincarnation of Kahana, who were speaking in very extreme terms about the fact that Arabs should not be treated as citizens of the State of Israel.
And they did not win enough votes to get their 4 seats. They're out.
And they're out.
Okay, when you went to Israel, you were reading the same polls and the same stories everybody else was. It looked like Isaac Herzog and the Zionist Union was going to get more seats than Netanyahu. It didn't mean he'd be able to form a coalition government, but it looked like he would have a higher vote. What happened? You were there. What happened so dramatically in the last 24 hours that, lo and behold, Netanyahu pulls out what has turned out to be a rather stunning victory?
I agree with Phyllis that the Trump card that Netanyahu pulled out in the last minute was security. I would even make it a little bit more extreme and use the word fear. We were discussing this in the back room before the show. The feeling was that for the first time in Israeli elections, very much like American politics 4 or 5 years ago, elections will be won by hope and not by fear. That we are mature enough, that we understand that fear in some way is a manipulation, and let's look not in a microscope, let's not look at the worst case scenario, but rather let's look at other scenarios and look at different priorities than fighting Iran or protecting ourselves from the Palestinians who want to demolish us, etc. But rather look at what do we want to live, what kind of Israel do we want to live in? And we were very close, Israelis in Israel, Israelis around the world, to have a hopeful, a vision of what Israel could look like 20, 30, 40 years from now, rather than looking at what the Likud has been playing on, and very, very smart and successfully so, on Iran is about to complete a nuclear weapon. This is the only thing that we should be concerned with.
Okay. It sounds like you feel maturity is reflected more in those who hope than those who have fear. Did I understand you correctly?
100%.
And then you say to me that at the last moment, the Israeli electorate went with fear instead of hope. Are you saying, in essence, that, and I'm very anxious to hear what an Israeli would say, very often Americans are very disappointed in the American electorate. We have a low opinion of people in general when they go to the polls. American Jews have an idealized notion of what Israelis are. Israelis are not supposed to be like Americans. They are supposed to be mature. You grow up much earlier than Americans grow up. When we meet young Israelis, they are not 17, 18, 20-year-olds like we have in America. So there's a sense that there's a maturity to the Israeli people. And what you're saying is that in the end, the Israeli electorate turned out not to be mature at all.
Mark, I very much agree with your reflecting of what I'm saying. I think that you take a 20-year-old Israeli and a 20-year-old American or American Jew, for that matter, and the level of maturity, obviously somebody went through the military. The Holocaust wasn't that far back. The establishment of the State of Israel was less than 70 years ago. 60 years ago, we had less than 1 million people living in Israel. Now we have less than 7 million people in Israel, 5 million people voting. 35,000 people can make the difference between a full Knesset seat, which is only 120 members. So we're a very young country, we're a very small country, and the worst case scenario in Israel compared to the worst case scenario in the U.S. is obviously unheard of. The drama in Israeli elections is still very, very extreme, almost as extreme for many people, for 30 out of 120 Knesset members, as we are under as big of a risk as we were 20, 30, 50 years ago.
That's what they seem to feel.
That's what they seem to feel. The startup nation didn't come up in these elections.
Okay. Jonathan, do you have any other perspective you want to bring on? So why Netanyahu pulled out this last-minute victory?
Well, I'm not sure it was a last-minute victory. This is a victory that's been building. I mean, we have the barbarians at the gates. We have ISIS a day's drive away. We have Iran to the east, Hamas to the west. The West, Israel surrounded by a witch's
Are you
brew of
saying
politics.
you did not believe the polls?
I didn't believe the polls. I think this is the biggest disaster for polls and the media since Dewey beats Truman. Except that was just the Chicago Tribune. This is almost every Jewish paper and Israeli paper. They missed it. And they missed because they're ashamed of the emotion of fear. Fear has been made to seem like a negative emotion when, in truth, when you're in trouble, fear is the most elegant emotion because that's how you deal with what's in front of you. And the Israelis, and ironically, in terms of the economy, in the poorer towns, you see the latest stats came out today. In the lower half of Israeli villages and towns, they voted more for Netanyahu, for Likud, because they feel vulnerable. Your vulnerability is a continuum, and they feel some people are starry-eyed and we can't trust them, and some people are people who understand I want to be with them in a foxhole.
So you think Netanyahu was always going to win?
I think he was, and I think I think the media and ignored the average person.
Very interesting.
As Peres put it a couple of years ago, this was a confusion between the Israelis and the Jews, as Peres put it.
Interesting. Now, in some way, Micah, Jonathan is saying something you said on JBS when we had our coverage of the election day, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. You say it. I'll ask you the same way. How do you explain Netanyahu's winning when it seemed as if everybody expected Herzog to win?
Well, I can explain how we won because that's a very practical way.
How did he win?
And but first I have to put it into context. That is that there were huge losers in this election. One of them was not the Labour Party, and one has to be very clear on that. Labour nearly doubled their representation. That's very, very important to realize. That's huge. All right. In terms of the Likud, not just in terms of numbers, in terms of the Likud, the three parties that come together with the Likud that are more similar, either right or center-right or further to the right of them, which would include Bennett's party and Lieberman's party, came together with 44 seats. In the last Knesset, they had 43. So I think it should be noted that a lot didn't change in terms of Likud in that way. What did change is that there was a coalition around Labour, which really thrust them in a way where they were dying. They were dying as a party.
Labour was dying.
As a party. And this injected a whole new breath. So that's one thing. How did he win? It was very, very simple. What happened is when you look at Americans look at the electorate and they see two parties. And they try to figure, well, we vote for a person. The election in Israel didn't work that way and doesn't work that way. Though there was one election where you voted for parties and for a person. We're not talking about that. The point is, though, it became very clear that from the party situation, the people who in the national camp, which is called Machaneh Leumi, the national camp, which includes the three parties I just referred to.
Which three?
Which would have included Likud, Lieberman's party, and Bennett's party. Okay. Now, as they come together, Bennett's party was growing and growing, which is very, very important. But what happened is those voters were running away from Likud. So someone stood up on Saturday night before the election in a major protest in Kikar Rabin, and said that in Tel Aviv, when the leaders of the settler movement, called Daniela Weiss, and she stands up and she despises Netanyahu because he's a politician. Because you need to know something. There are ideologues and politicians in Israeli politics. Politicians make deals and say things that need to be said in order to get elected. And then there are ideologues that only do what they feel is most important. So she gets up, she despises this man because he made all these promises and did not fulfill them, right? Which is important. She stands up and she introduces Netanyahu, introduces him. And she says, all of you recognize that if you're going to vote for your marginal parties and you're going to be very minute in the way in which you perceive this election, then the Machaneh Leumi, which is the large camp of the right, will be devastated. So you have to get out of your narrow perspective and vote for a large party. Now, it's very important. The left was hoping that that's what would happen, that the Machaneh Leumi would be devastated, and that people would be disenfranchised from Netanyahu as not being a true rightist, which is the whole reason why there was an expose 10 days before the election in Yediot. Yediot wanted him to lose. They brought out this expose that said Netanyahu was willing in secret negotiations to give out all of this stuff. Look at that. He can't really be a rightist. He was hoping, they were hoping, that the rightists would look and say, that's not a real rightist. A rightist can't negotiate on these basic principles and agree to give them up. So what happened? The opposite happened. Firstly, people saw that expose as a political maneuver by Yediot. Secondly, it became absolutely clear from Daniela Weiss's wisdom that if the right loses the major election, then the right will lose all of its power in settlement movement and its orientation towards security and all the other elements, which also includes, by the way, a free market economy, which people are not talking about too, which is very, very different than the Labour Party, which is a very socialist-oriented understanding. What happened was Netanyahu was losing and Likud was losing their votes to Bennett and Lieberman. Instead, he leached them back. He brought them all back, and by bringing them back, he thrust himself forward. Now, the reality is that kind of move is the tactical strategies of electioneering in Israel. It's not fear-mongering. It's not. And that's where I disagree with this whole idea that it's racism and all these other kinds of things. It's the nature of what it means. The vast majority of people who voted for Likud are in that bailiwick where they would potentially be voting anyhow. Okay? And that's important. Now, Israelis tend to stand around the middle. So they vote a little left and they vote a little right. They don't vote extreme right or extreme left. And those were big losers in the election. However, if your standard voters are going to the right of you, you got to pull them back. And that's why he stood up and he said no to a Palestinian state. But the reality is that's just rhetoric.
What do you mean it's just rhetoric?
Because what happens, it got him, because he knows from all of the history of what we're dealing with in the last 8 years, okay? He knows that the policy of working together and creating some sort of rapprochement with the Palestinians, whatever it is necessary.
Okay,
it can't happen
all right,
now, but he's not cutting the whole thing down.
The four of you, all of you have spoken once. I don't know, anybody now can jump in. But let me just frame the question for you.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing now from people who care about the future of the state of Israel, and they even like Netanyahu, they'll say to me, yeah, there's no two-state solution in the offing. But why in the world did he have to say that? Because it is heard by the world. And I don't know how Israelis hear it. I spoke to an Israeli journalist. He said Israelis couldn't care less what he said about the two-state solution. But the reality is the Obama administration cares. American Jews care. The EU cares. And there's a question as to why, what did he gain? What did he win? Who voted for Netanyahu who wouldn't have voted for him until he said, I'm not going to have a two-state solution, and I'm going to continue settlement growth?
Mark,
Who was he appealing to?
Likud in this set of elections is the first time that they not come out with a manifest. There was no matzah. There was no
Platform.
40-page, 50-page, 70-page platform like other parties. And Netanyahu, 3 days before the election, you would ask Israelis, do you think that the Bar Ilan statement that Netanyahu made that the only solution to the Palestinian issue was a two-state solution? People would say, well, I think 70-80% of Israelis would say this is actually what Netanyahu believes in. Until that, so I do not agree that Israelis did not see him coming a day before the elections and saying, no, I do not support a two-state solution. This did reverberate. This was front-page news for every Israeli.
Israelis.
For every Israeli
Did
in
it
Israel
win
and
him
outside.
Israeli support?
I think that as Micah mentioned, what it did is transfer the 6 or 7 seats in the Knesset from Abait Yehudi and from Israel Beiteinu, from Lieberman and from Bennett's party, which was needed in order to prevent Rivlin from giving Herzog the first opportunity in creating a coalition. I'm by the way, I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but with the relationships between Netanyahu and Lieberman, between Netanyahu and Kachlon, between Netanyahu and the leaders of Shas and Yahadut Torah, I don't think that it is 100% that Netanyahu will succeed in building a government. He has more likely than not, but I do see a situation where either Lieberman or Kachlon come to Netanyahu and say, these are basic foundations that we're not going to agree to.
For
enter
example?
For instance, the issue of two-state solution. If Netanyahu does put that in the governing principles
That he will
of the
not
coalition,
go for a two-state solution.
that we are removing the whole discussion with the Palestinians about a two-state solution. What Bennett's manifest, what Bennett's platform says. If Netanyahu puts that in, if Bennett requires, and I think that Bennett was the ideologist. Bennett was the guy who everything he says he believes in.
Naftali Bennett.
Naftali Bennett, he is the person, when I
what's
posted
his
on
stand on the
Facebook 3
two-state
days
solution?
before the elections, if you're thinking of voting right, I would vote Bennett. If you're thinking of voting left, I would vote Meretz, because these are the only two parties in Israeli politics who have never shed away from their ideology. They have a very clear mission statement. And when you're voting for any other party, you're voting into politics, you're voting into deal making. You don't really know what Herzog and Bibi have agreed to and what they will be discussing after the
It
elections.
comes back, by the way, to the original comment. The Israeli electorate doesn't look very smart based on your analysis.
He said mature, by the way, but
But now I'm saying smart.
Okay.
Both
Well,
smart and mature.
both being smart and being mature
Anyway,
are
you're saying that Bennett has said no two-state solution.
totally.
Who won't go with Netanyahu if Netanyahu says no two-state
Lieberman
solution?
came out in the press 2 months ago with a very clear two-state solution, backed by, supported
Lieberman
by.
won't go with Netanyahu, you think?
I don't know. I think that Lieberman feels, many people in Israeli politics feel
What
that
will
this is
Lapid do?
Lieberman's last
What will Lapid do?
last era in Israeli politics, and he may prefer being a high-level minister rather than follow what his
Right.
promises were.
Okay,
In respect to Lapid, I think that the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Lapid, or between Netanyahu and we can add Netanyahu's wife and Lapid, the personal relationships there, Lapid will be either even further down the list of people that Bibi will call up than Herzog. And I think that Israeli newspapers, not the Jewish press, but the Israeli press, put Lapid in the blues and reds of Israeli politics. As of 2 weeks ago, Lapid was clearly put as one of the four parties of Israel's left. Is no longer put in the center. And so I don't see Lapid being a candidate in Bibi's government.
Okay, what do you think of all this?
Well, I'm so torn because I favor, and I've been part of struggles in Israel for women's rights and for Arab rights. On the other hand, and we've been successful, and by the way, in this election, there is now 23% in the Knesset that's female, compared to only 19% in the U.S. Congress that's female, compared to 0% in the West Bank and in most of the surrounding Arab and Muslim nation states, Israel's neighbors. And there was a Muslim, actually, an Arab in charge of the entire election, Jacbsohn. And this is all good. This is all and this proves that Israel is not racist. I mean, nobody's perfect, not racist, democratic. But I think that the danger, first, the hostility to Israel from America under Obama is a real problem, both of perception and reality. And I think that the rockets raining down for years on Sderot, the war in Gaza, the terror tunnels, Hezbollah on the borders. We know, as somebody said, ISIS, a drive away, a day away. These are surreal barbarians, and Israel is the defender of Western civilization against barbarism. So at such a moment in history, I am sad that I put women's rights struggle for the moment, just for the moment, second to the right of my people to survive. I'm not going to forget about it. I'm not regretting it. And one of my friends, Anat Berko, is in Likud and will be sitting in the Knesset. And she works on terrorism and on Palestinian women terrorists.
Phyllis, for 67 years, we've put aside human rights, rights of the homosexual community. We've put aside the right of young couples to buy apartments and to live in. We've put aside the enormous Gini gap that's just increasing in Israel. We're putting aside employment of male Orthodox Jews and female Arabs in Israel. All of these topics were the agenda of everyone except for Likud in the past elections. If you would go topic by topic and ask 5 million Israelis with a voting right, would you like to reduce the budget giving to settlements and increase the budget giving to young couples?
Oh, this is a big discussion.
95% of Israelis would say yes.
Israel has gay pride marches, and Israel gives political asylum to homosexuals who would otherwise be killed or thrown from a rooftop in Gaza and on the West Bank. And
And nevertheless, the
Israel,
Baita
not
Yehudi got
perfect.
more electorates than merits.
People say crazy things. And I think that these various men that we've mentioned, they're trading their grandmother's bones right now as we sit here and speak. God knows what they're going to give up or sacrifice to get something.
But do I hear you're saying that for all of the, for lack of a better term, there's a liberal ideology that's driven you in many areas of life? At the moment, whether you use the word fear or you're concerned for the
You could say
security,
it's a Jewish morality.
are
not
you
just
saying at the
liberal.
moment that that trumps for you? And if you were an Israeli, you would be voting for Netanyahu because you believe all the other issues that you mentioned, as important as they are, unfortunately, if there is real security at stake, they become secondary by definition. Are you saying that's basically where you are now?
I'm saying that, but I hear what you're saying because it's true. Every time Israel is at risk or any country is at risk, all the human rights issues, all the anti-racism issues are put to the side, to the back of the bus. So it would be wonderful to be able to I hope that Netanyahu does something different, something unexpected, while guaranteeing very serious protection from nuclear Iran, and makes alliances. It's already underway with India, with Saudi Arabia. Israel will require new allies, cannot count on America anymore.
Yeah, I need a point of clarification because it's very, very important. Not just in the election, but in general in Israel. I think it's enormously important to say that that there is not a lot of daylight between Labour Party and Likud on the major issues of security in Israel. And it's not because I'm a supporter of any group, and I want that to be clear. Labour is not looking at ISIS differently than Likud is. And Labour's not looking at Iran differently than
Yes, but they're perceived by the Israeli electorate differently.
I don't believe that either. Because I
Then
will
why
say to you,
didn't- then
there was
I-
almost no discussion in this election about security. I'm very sorry.
Yes, but when
There
it
was
came
almost no
time
discussion.
for people to vote, they
You're-
voted for
no,
Netanyahu.
No, around this table we're thinking, and a lot of people who I'm reading about, a lot of people are thinking, oh, he won because he has such an important cachet and gravitas with regard
No,
to
no.
security.
Have
Well,
an
that's what
idea.
Oren said.
Have
Well,
an
he
idea.
has that, but that's not.
People were angry at Obama's being so
Fine, but it's
scandalously
not because,
shameful
look, I've got to tell you
towards him.
something.
That
There's no
perhaps
way,
may
and
be a
I'm
factor.
not. I'll be very clear. I'm not a supporter of the Labour Party. I think that Herzog could have been a great prime minister. Also, I'm not a supporter of Likud. I'm not, and I think that Netanyahu could be a great prime minister too. It has nothing to do with an axe to grind. All I'm saying is it's wrong, absolutely wrong, to think that one is better on the issue of security than the other, because none of them think that Iran is just some fly-by-night
It's not a
thing.
question of
And
whether
it's
one's
also
better. It's a question of how it's perceived.
Yeah, understood. I understand.
And maybe the Israelis perceive. That's what it seemed to me.
No, I think the world perceives it that way. I
Then
don't
what?
think Israel-
Then what made the Israeli? I mean, Oren says it's basically what
The
happened
polls were wrong in the first place. Every pollster should be fired and never rehired on this level. And if you look at previous polls, you have the same kind of thing. Polls in Israel are notoriously bad. They don't work.
Okay,
In addition to that, pundits,
then
and I'm
why
a
was
pundit.
he always going to win?
I'm a pundit.
Why was he always going to win?
No, it was going to be close. And because it
wasn't close. It
No,
turned out not
it
to be
was going to be
close.
close. So my interpretation is it was going to be close. It wasn't close because of the rabbit that he pulled out of the hat with regard to the trick that I told you with regard to the strategy just now, as he leached back from people who were running away from him. But he didn't leach from another side. He leached from the right coming back to the center, which was important. But I'm trying to say, and this is important, it's too easy to just sort of say, he's Mr. Security, and as a result, people wanted security. I don't believe that. These guys, to be the Prime Minister of Israel doesn't mean you're going to be a lapdog to the United States on the questions of Iran. I'm sorry.
Okay,
you might not have come to the
but
Congress
that you're
at that moment.
disagreeing specifically with Oren's statement that when Netanyahu said no two-state solution, it won him votes. You don't think it did?
If it won him votes from the right, not from the left.
Yep.
It won him votes. He brought people back from the extreme right
wherever.
to the center. Do you get my point? He didn't win votes from the other side. He said to them, you see, I really am an authentic rightist, even though we know he's a politician, which means there is no such thing, all right? But you get my point here. I'm trying to say, just a second, it's wrong, and I'm not saying here in the room. I'm saying I see that the pundits are.
Absolutely.
And the pundits are crazy
right.
here, and I'm a pundit, okay? I'm a pundit. They should be truly raked over the coals on this level. Not only were they wrong, they were giving us information and analysis which was way off
Okay.
base.
They may be shameless.
How do you
Right,
see it?
that's what
How
I'm
do you
saying.
see it?
Well, first of all, back to the inflammatory statements from Netanyahu. It's been very selective who we've been inflammatory about. For example, the Arab list, no one went back into their background.
cares?
Who
Who
cares?
cares?
Well, I would like to know
Who
how.
cares?
Well, they may be part of a
Yeah, but
Herzog.
look, the reason
right.
why we care is that
Yeah.
Netanyahu is on the front
No,
page
no,
of
no,
every
no,
American
because
newspaper.
it would make us understand how deeply we should be afraid.
How
So I
deeply
think
the Israeli should
the
be afraid.
Exactly
how
should be afraid.
How
Yes, exactly.
Oren should be afraid.
Yes, right. In other words, if
He
you're
thinks you should be more afraid, Oren.
I'm actually not only afraid, I'm amazed by the fact that not more Israelis are afraid. I mean, when you come and you say, news are coming out in the last few hours that Obama is about to come out with a statement saying that if this is Israel's response to where the world is going, then I'm removing the automatic veto that the U.S. Has been giving Israel for the last 66 years in the United Nations. I'm worried not because of the fact that this will happen. I'm worried because half of Israel are not worried about that. The half of Israel are not worried about, we don't need foreign relations. We can be a North Korea. We are the Jewish homeland. We have biblical rights. We were chased by the Holocaust. I'm worried about Sheldon Adelson in Washington. 4 months ago, I heard him personally saying to Chaim Saban for a question of him, aren't you worried about the demographic situation? Israel's no longer going to be a democracy, a real democracy. And Sheldon's response was, where in the Bible does it say that Israel has to be a democracy? I'm not only worried by those kind of statements and that kind of direction, but the fact that there were so many Israelis that stood up and clapped.
And I'm worried that Obama is making common cause with tyrants and barbarians and scapegoating and demonizing the only Jewish state which is a democracy. So I'm very worried about the American Jewish voting population and funding population that thinks Israel is wrong and that their Judaism means criticizing Israel first.
I agree,
right?
Phyllis.
So we're worried.
You
We're
ask
worried.
both Israelis and Jews around the world, 30% will say that if Israel, the Declaration of Independence, talks about Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. If you had to choose one, 30% of Israelis and Jews around the world would say Jewish. If you have to choose one, it's Jewish. You ask another 30%, they'll say democratic. I'm worried about the other 40% who says, who cares? It's no longer an issue. We have a state, we're strong. Bibi says he can solve the Iranian issue. He doesn't come with a solution. He says he can solve the Palestinian issue. Bibi did not come with a solution. There are other solutions. Naftali Bennett has
Well-
solutions. Bibi does not have solutions.
No, but he was right in saying that a bad deal, there are alternatives to a bad deal, and that sanctions
What are the
should be
alternatives, though, that
intensified
Bibi's
on
coming
Iran.
with? Bombing Iran? I mean, let's
No,
be
wait, no,
serious.
no,
How
no.
is he going to prevent
Not-
Iran from developing nuclear weapons?
Well, there are things that can and may be done that I can't talk about.
By the way, I don't understand why it's complicated. Iran came to the table because sanctions were so severe, it crippled their economy. And basically they came to the table because they realized that they had
Yeah.
to do something to get the sanctions lifted.
And
the
Obama
idea,
is
and the
lifting
idea
the
here was
sanctions
that
with
if they didn't
no guarantees.
if they didn't toe the line, the sanctions would be reimposed. Now, we're afraid that the sanctions will never be reimposed. Menendez wants the sanctions reimposed. That's what Bibi's answer is. Bibi's answer is not bomb. Bibi's answer is, you want to stop Iran, you do what was working in the first place, and there's no reason ever to have lifted the sanctions, except it seems that Mr. Obama has a different agenda. But I don't understand why people say he didn't give an alternative. He has an alternative. Put the sanctions back and make them even tougher if you have
Stronger,
to.
yeah.
Why isn't that an option?
That is not a strategy. That is not a
Why is that
declared
not a
strategy of Netanyahu, because what
But it's what I
Israeli
heard him
voters
say.
are choosing Netanyahu and not Herzog, not because he has a better idea, a better alternative of how to remove the likelihood that Iran will develop a bomb. just because Netanyahu is so fierce, he's going against Obama, he must have a plan. And we're not, I think that the Israeli people are not receiving. Same thing about Palestinians. Bennett's idea is, let's create a South Africa, a place where we have maybe a minority, but we have the entitlement to have government, and there will be a larger Muslim community, the Jewish community from Jordan to the sea, but we have the legitimate right, the historical right, the biblical right to control other people. That is a solution from Bennett's
I
perspective.
have never heard him say we will be the minority. I've heard the rest. I have never heard any.
I've never heard a serious demographer
heard,
coming and saying that, well, looking at the numbers, take the Gazan people, take the people living in the West Bank, add them to the Israeli population, which has 21% that are not Jews, and what other numbers are there?
But every Israeli I talk to says there should be a two-state solution, but there's nobody to make a two-state solution with. I don't hear the number of Israelis who say there should be a one-state solution and the Palestinians who cares about it. It's very, very minor in the state of Israel. I want to come back to the other question because we're being watched here by America, and what American Jews have heard, and it's interesting to hear how you say that basically the question is being framed incorrectly.
Correct.
But there's one question that right now is front and center on American television and in the newspapers all the time. What's the question is, Obama seems to have pulled the rug out from the relationship he had whatever bad or good with the Obama administration, and that American Jews are saying this to me. It's not like I think a two-state solution is possible. I don't think so. But why would you want to go public with that? What's to be gained? All you get is the Obama administration upset with you, the EU upset with you. It makes us look bad. Somebody said to me, it's the optics. Why? What's to be gained?
Obama was on the warpath.
And I'm asking you, to what extent is it significant? Are the optics significant? And if it seems to be true that basically Israelis don't care, and that's really what we're hearing here. It seems to me that Netanyahu was elected because he was able to coalesce enough of the right into Likud itself. It's not that the government went right; it just redistributed the right in a way that gave Netanyahu more power.
Correct.
Okay, and therefore it's incorrect for all the liberals of American television to come on and say, "Oh, look, the Israeli electorate moved to the right."
Correct.
Okay, but what is true is the Prime Minister of Israel has now taken public stands which seem to undermine mainstream Jewish thought, mainstream Israeli thought, and certainly administration thought. What does that mean to you, Jonathan?
It means nothing to me, honestly, because things change, things are meaningless in what you could say in an election, and I think the bottom line is security.
What would you say
And
to
for
American
example,
Jews who are worried?
Who are worried? You know what? Worry about when the buses were blowing up. Worry about that I don't have the right to go to Kever Rachel. Worry about that you can't go safely anywhere. Worry about that the world is turning upside down. And worry about the fact that like the Israelis don't care, there's even more Americans who really don't care once you bring up the question. So why should an Israeli worry about some guy in Manhattan
That's
who
Jonathan's
doesn't
answer.
care?
What's your answer?
Well, I understand. I certainly understand this point of view, and I understand the worry of the noners, those 40% that they're not involved. Here's the big issue in terms of optics and what's really going on. Firstly, we're looking at the optics from one point of view. We're looking at it from the outsider's point of view, and the frustration that the outsiders have with Israel. There's another set of optics, and that's what drove the decision to make the announcement. That's the optics of how it's going to play in Israel.
Which
All
is
right?
really his concern.
Right. All right. Afterwards, once it's elected, we can try to reframe that. The optics is how it plays in Israel. And one thing that plays very well in Israel, across the board, I don't care
Across the board?
I don't care who the prime minister is going, only on prime ministerial potential characters. No matter who it would be, over the last 20 years, sometimes saying no to the United States is very good. Why? Because it gives you a sense of gravitas. You used the word earlier in your opening. It gives a sense of strength. It also says that you're not some lapdog of the United States, and that's important too. But there's another element. The reality is that the United States and Israel have a relationship, and the prime minister and the president might be strained right now in terms of their personal relationship, but they still work together. They have to work together because there are too many things that connect them to one another. Are they going to turn their back on Israel? I mean, it's a silly kind of thing. I almost feel like I'm talking to adolescent girls in a battle or something. It's like crazy. You know, you got to get beyond those emotional issues in order to actually work together, and they will, because their teams have to work together and they have to work. Too much is at stake. So you could say to me, oh, just a second, so why say these silly things? Because it wasn't about the United States. It was about getting elected. And that was really important. It was important for his, and that optic was important. Now, does the EU care? Do the Western European countries care? I got to tell you something. They would not have been any more happy or less happy with regard to Israel when and their approach to Zionism and liberalism wouldn't have been any better had the Zionist Union won. All right. Remember, one of the powers of that drive the BDS movement is Zionism. So the left, with the Zionist title, which the reason why they chose that name, by the way, is to try to leach people from the center towards the left, to say that's not the only group, it's not just the Zionists or the nationalists. We can be Zionists and leftists also. You see, that's what I'm trying to say. And it's very, very important to realize this. So the Europeans would not be any more excited about Israel's point of view regarding Iran and ISIS and everything else.
Everybody said he would be more excited.
I don't believe that either, because as soon as, you see, here's the problem. This presidency, and it's very, very important to realize it, it's the first time in a lot of ways when this presidency not only takes an issue of discipline to heart, they seek revenge for people who question them. It's across the board in Congress, it's across the board in lobbyists, it's across the board that people come in. If you challenge the presidency and the administration publicly, they're going to come back and you're going to pay for it. Now, Israel up until now has always said, I'll take that risk. And that's exactly what we've got right now. It's a big risk. Israel's going to pay. What are they going to pay?
I think that it's way, way beyond what it is you're saying. I mean, the Israeli press, you read Chemi Shalev in Haaretz yesterday, talking about the Roman army and taking over a town, and then they would burn down the bridges so that the soldiers would not be able to, lo and behold, all of a sudden you cannot supply basic supplies to your military. And many Israelis see Bibi in order to secure another 4 years, 2 years, many of us envision. He was willing to burn down many bridges, including the bridge, the very delicate bridge we have with the U.S. now, and the very delicate bridge we have with the 20% of Israeli citizens who are not Jewish.
I realize this, but what you're suggesting then is he would sort of reevaluated his priorities and said, well, maybe I should deliberately not win? That's what you're saying, and that's what Chemi's principle is, the thought in the principle. And you've got to realize, in reading the papers in this election, if you read Haaretz, you would have thought there were only two choices, merits and labor.
Yes.
And that's difficult to deal with. The reality is that what should Bibi should have said, well, maybe there's a possibility that I would lose and let me play in that direction? No, of course not. First win, and then deal with your other issues. And now you can deal with...
He was also dealing with a Democratic Party that was booing Jerusalem at the convention 4 years ago, before any of this. So clearly you have this is a borderline anti-Zionist party at this point and getting worse.
I'm sorry, which
The
is?
American
The Democratic
Party.
The Democratic Party.
It's a harsh statement, but your example happens to be
He's
correct.
right. Yeah, he's right.
Yeah, it's a harsh statement, though.
And therefore, what you know, it's sort of like
Your example is correct.
Like the joke about the guy on the firing squad who was afraid to ask for a cigarette.
Right,
You know, so what at that point?
You're right. Why
You
get
know?
in trouble?
Yeah. You know, so that's what's happening too. And it's very interesting that now that Bibi won, and now that Bibi may be there, assuming that he'll be there for the next couple of years, there's already articles starting to show up in the Washington papers and like the Hill and other congressional things where telling that the Obama administration has to walk a step back into getting along with Bibi.
For the next 2
I mean,
years.
you
For the
know,
next 2 years.
Because 2
so
years
it's not
is
like
important here.
there's no pressure on.
Excuse me, I have to make a point.
Obama.
In terms of optics, Obama has yet to pick up the phone to call Netanyahu.
As we tape.
Okay, yes. But he quickly picked up the phone to call Rouhani when he was elected president of Iran.
What's it say to you?
What do you mean? Because his agenda is pro-Islamist. He picked up the phone when Morsi was elected president of Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood candidate, picked up the phone quickly, but he delayed picking up the phone for al-Sisi, who is now the head of Egypt and anti-Islamist. So what does this say to any of us about what Obama's foreign policy is about? His foreign policy is he's banking on helping Iran gain hegemony in the Middle East to keep the Sunnis in check. Why he's doing this, I really can't tell you. And he's playing with enormous fire. But his signature, he's a Jew hater, in my opinion. And Israel
That's
is
a
the
very
Jewish
powerful
state.
statement to make.
I feel very uncomfortable. I mean,
about
I've
the
been in the
President of the
U.S.
United
now
I make
for
powerful
70 years.
statements.
About the President of the United States.
I
that's
understand.
A powerful,
I
I would
understand.
normally would never interrupt this,
Yes, you would.
No, not in this environment.
But wait,
but it's
are you-
very
are you-
powerful.
are you
I'm sorry,
upset by
it's
that
very, very
statement?
powerful.
I'm not upset by it. I'm not convinced by it, but I'm
Yeah.
not upset by
All
it.
right, just understand.
Some of his best friends, I'm sure, are
Okay.
Jews. I have no doubt. But
In this instance, you're speaking only for yourself, and you have the right to do that all the time.
well, yes.
Does Israel
Why
need
does
the
he
United
have?
States?
Wait, why does Obama? Let's say he's not a Jew hater. Why does he have it in for the Jewish state? What could it possibly be? It's a democracy. It's very tiny. It's under siege. Why is he not taking off after ISIS? Why is he not taking off after Turkey? He called Erdogan when he got elected very quickly. Erdogan is letting in all the jihadists to get through Turkey to Syria and Iraq. Erdogan is turning the country Islamist and he's veiling the women. What is this man about if he's not part and parcel of a historically Muslim kind of Jew hatred?
By the way, I just want to clarify one thing, what I said. What I look back on is how 8 years ago, I was constantly being told that Obama was nothing to worry about by the Jewish left. So they were saying the opposite thing. And I see one thing happening after the other where Israel was being squeezed from the very, very beginning of the Obama administration. So as much as I was told that there was nothing to be afraid about, and Jewish principals all over America were telling their kids, how dare you say Obama is dangerous? And then I see what's going on. You know what? I'm not going to be angrier at Phyllis than I am at those
We have
people.
very few minutes left.
Okay.
I have two questions I want to make sure I get to. Number one, does Israel need the United States? I want a yes or no first.
Let me think about it. Ask somebody else.
Does Israel need the United States?
Absolutely, yes.
Does Israel need the United States?
Yes, but that's in the long term. The next 2 years are very, very interesting.
Does Israel need the United States?
Do we want to be a North Korea or do we want to be a Scandinavian country 40 years from now? I think the answer to the question is that if we want to be a North Korea, Israel does not need the U.S. Israel has no reason to be a member of a coalition of Western thinking countries, democratic countries, who are trying to keep a reasonable world for everyone to live in.
Do you want to be North Korea?
I do not want North Korea.
Okay. So
I
you
am
don't
worried
want-
that these elections were another directions of Am levado yishkon.
We live alone.
No.
We live alone. The Jews are not dependent upon France and Germany and Italy and England and Canada and the U.S. We do what we think is right for us. We have biblical, we have
I
historical
think you're
reasons
exaggerating.
for us to steer our ship without taking in
Do
consideration
you
any
think that
American
I
represents
think it-
anywhere near the majority of Israelis?
Not the majority.
No.
Not the majority,
Haaretz
but the
readers.
coalition created from the current votes.
Is that
Okay,
true?
let me say something. I forgot what I want. The question we should be asking is, does America need Israel? Is America going to back the only Western democracy in
I
a
would
region?
like to believe the answer is yes.
Okay, does America need Israel should be
I
our
would like to
question.
believe the answer is yes.
A stable,
However, the
militarily
reality is
sophisticated.
they're not equal in power or importance.
That's true.
And at the moment, everybody I've talked to has said that, like it or not, Israel desperately needs the United States to continue,
Correct.
to survive, to do well, to thrive. It's not simply we don't want to be North Korea. For the Jewish state to survive, it has to have the United States.
Yeah,
for other
Bibi's
things,
pride would prevent him from saying so.
Really?
No, I don't think so.
Enacting.
Ec-
Despite the
economically and
number of years that
technologically.
he worked in the United Nations, Bibi's pride would say, we are on a course which we are entitled to, which we are required to go so, and if the U.S. doesn't like the fact that we have decided against negotiations with
Say
the
what you want to say
Palestinians.
before I ask my last question.
So, firstly, I think it's important to recognize that the relationship is very important and way beyond simply foreign affairs. There's a huge amount of interaction on the economic level, on the technological side, all these other things. And Netanyahu is not interested in isolationism at all on this level. The fact that he's dealing with and we're going back to a security question, whether or not that's right or wrong, is a whole different issue. And the blend or the marriage between these two societies is very important. Now, I've got to say something about the Obama relationship with the Jewish state and the Jewish people. I think it's very, very important. Because you're wrong or because you disagree with someone and think they're wrong does not make them an anti-Semite. I want that to be very clear. Anti-Semites should be reserved for people who truly, truly hate. Now, we can disagree on that, Phyllis.
We can discuss it at length.
And I appreciate your point of view, but I can't be in the room and not say that, because I think it's very, very important for me to clarify that.
But I don't think it's clear one way or the other.
No, but nonetheless, I'm saying that to call the President of the United States an anti-Semite.
But
and
anti-Zionism
it seems
is
extreme.
anti-Semitism today.
Okay. That said, now there's another element which is important about this very question, is whether or not the United States and Israel are symbiotic and need one another. In the world in which we live today, great nations, and we could disagree as to how great each nation is and whether or not they're at the apex or at the nadir of their societies. I expect that. That's not the point. There's symbiosis between great nations, and great minds require them to work together on a lot of issues.
And how does that apply to Israel and America?
That's the two great nations with a lot of creativity.
And you want them to work together?
Of course.
Okay.
And they are,
I think
is my
you're
point.
also confusing Obama and the United
States.
States.
Bingo.
Because if you look at all the Gallup polls, Israel is Israel's one of the most popular countries in the country.
In my mind, we're talking about the American administration. We're not talking about America.
Then we should be exact about that.
Although you are just said
Yeah.
that your Democratic Congress gives you reason for pause.
The Democratic Convention gives me reason for pause.
No, you're talking about
All
the
right,
Congress,
yeah,
the
well,
Democratic
yes, it
members
does.
of Congress.
I'm concerned.
So it's a little bigger for
Yes,
you
right.
than the Obama administration.
Right.
I have one more question. I must get it in here. This comes back to something you said at the very beginning, and it was really inappropriate to interrupt you and talk about it. But I do want to ask all four of you. I have heard the charge that the Obama administration actively injected itself into this election to try to defeat Benjamin Netanyahu, and that through the State Department, the President of the United States got money to parties that were running against Netanyahu. I have also been told by Israeli journalist after Israeli journalist, there is not one shred of evidence, not one, that the Obama administration or the State Department ever gave money to any organization that was involved with this election. Not one piece of evidence. Yet I see it nightly on Sean Hannity on Fox, and I hear Don Senor, who I like very much, did Startup Nation, goes night after night and charges the Obama administration with this. Now, I am not in any way defending the Obama administration, but I don't want something said that's not true. Have you heard from anybody that you know that there was active financial money going from the Obama administration or the State Department to support candidates who are running against Bibi Netanyahu?
I'm an attorney by profession, and I'm not very much in the headlines. I'm in the actual text. And when you look into the details of what Dan Senor is claiming and what is being investigated, is that the U.S. government at some point of time supported an organization called One Voice, which is a British, Israeli, Palestinian organization working on world peace. And they did receive a grant from the U.S. government. And that this organization presumably was part of the V15 group of organizations that tried to promote their vision of what Israel should look like. When you read the details, it looks so absurd. It's almost as absurd as the Likud who ran to Israel, to Salim Gibran, to the Supreme Court judge who was in charge of the election process. By the time that it was time for Gibran to discuss it, they said, "Well, we just filed it."
He basically threw it out. He
basically said, "Guys, are you serious?"
Right.
And they said, "You know what? We're stepping out." He says, "Wait a minute."
The violation is bigger
It
than-
violates the American tax laws.
Just
not
a
the
minute.
Israeli.
I want to hear.
It is
Have you
such
heard-
a minor issue.
Have you
it is,
heard-
I
have
think,
you
a waste
seen
of the 5 minutes
evidence
left.
that the Obama administration gave money to any group through the State Department or anywhere else trying to defeat Obama, trying to defeat Netanyahu.
Okay, Oren came with an absolute accurate description of the money trail and how it.
That money
went
trail happened way before this election.
That's fine, but V15 is not. V15 is a part of now, and it's a
Did
new
he
phenomenon.
get any
New
money?
phenomenon.
V15 got no money
but they're-
during this
they're
election.
they're a product of this, and they actually emerged as a result
They
of it.
got
so-
no money during this election.
Understood, but the biggest issue was not whether or not it violated Israeli law and Israeli election law. The biggest issue is this, and that is the 501c3 phenomenon in the tax code very clearly articulate that you cannot cross over into politics for that status as a.
I just want to know if you think, is
so
there any
I'm just
evidence
saying,
that Obama or the State
One
Department
voice
did
Well,
this?
just applied for
I'm just saying.
501(c) status.
Is there any evidence that Obama or the State Department gave money to
the money
somebody's-
came earlier and before the election campaign. There's no question
and it was
about
all, the answer is
question.
no.
No, I'm saying,
But you
yeah,
don't say. I want to know.
there is no evidence that money came.
Okay.
First, you
have
can't get money through the State
have you
Department that
heard-
fast.
Have you
This
any
is something
evidence?
that I've only read about.
Okay.
But I know the Senate is investigating. The Senate is still investigating.
The Senate investigates everything.
I know. So
In and
I-
of itself, that
I
means
think-
nothing.
I
Okay,
agree.
let me recommend.
And I'm saying to
let
you
me recommend
that
Lori
I-
Lowen. Let me speak. Lori Lowenthal Marcus in the Jewish press has been writing about this. My concern is not so much about the funding, but it's about the on-the-ground activism of Jeremy Bird, who had been the strategist for Obama's campaigns.
He now works for Hillary Clinton, by the way.
As of today,
He now works for Hillary Clinton. He does not work for Obama, and that
As of
isn't getting
when?
money to anybody.
I'm not addressing money because I don't know the money trail.
Okay,
I know what I've read.
Every night on Fox,
I
that's
know
what's
what
being
I've read.
said.
But Jeremy Bird, whether he's working for Obama or whether he's working for the Secretary of State, the former Secretary of State, or the future candidate for the American presidency, what is he doing trying
He's
to get
a hired hand.
What is he doing trying to get out an Obama style,
He's a hired
get out the
hand.
vote, try to drive in the marginalized people?
You know, there's so much real to be upset about. It drives me
Well, you
crazy.
asked the question.
I
didn't
agree,
raise it.
No, as a matter of fact, you did raise it. In your
How did I
opening
raise
comments,
it?
you threw in that you were upset that Obama was trying to influence the Israeli
That is
election.
correct, you're right, I
And
did.
he is
I
not.
did.
By the way, there's no question among the five of us that we know that in the White House, everybody was hoping Netanyahu would lose. But that's different than his doing something about it. And on JBS, I want the viewing public to know that I can't find one person who has a bit of evidence, not one Israeli journalist, and none of the four of you can say to me you have any evidence that Obama, who may be guilty of many, many things, is guilty of trying to actively undermine an Israeli election.
This is maybe a too negative of a comment to say, but this smells too much. Let's not look at the McCarthy area, but let's look at the anti-Semitism, where a case is made against Israel from taking 1 and 7 and 9 and bringing them together and trying to create a picture which is absurd. This is how I treat these allegations. It just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
It's too crazy. It's too weird. And the fact that it is under investigation gives people who just read headlines that kind
Good
of a
for
view,
you.
which
All right,
we
we
should
have
stay
to
away
wrap
from.
up. So I'm asking you now for a final comment.
Oh my
As you
God.
look here at the Israeli election, where Netanyahu comes out on top, he has the chance first to form the coalition government. I believe he's going to do it. You're not so sure. What's your sense, and are you optimistic now about the immediate Israeli future?
I think it's going to be a dark future in the near future, and that's why I think people wanted Bibi. He's more of a daddy than the other guys,
Interesting.
and that's why. But
Okay.
it's not going to be a happy, easy time.
Oren, he says it's not going to be a happy time for Israelis.
I-
I want your where do you see the future going now for the state of Israel?
I'm looking at the microscope. I'm not very happy. I'm changing to a telescope. I'm even less happy. I think the Israeli, a big majority, 70, 80% of Israelis thought that this election was about housing, was about health, was about education, was about the governance of law in Israel, and were slapped in their face, including Likud voters, by the way, including right-wing voters. And what we got was a mishmash based upon a incomplete political system. Our parliamentary system was modified, was improved, but it still creates this monster that nobody wants.
Whose fault is it?
I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that. I think we have laws that we put in place in 1949, in 1951, in 1953 relating to elections, and we're looking back, and nobody would vote in favor of these laws, but it's too difficult to change them. Israel is in a situation, I use the word mature, I'll use it again. We are mature enough to look at our country as a very strong country. We can increase our GDP by more than 10% every year in the next 4 years if we decide to disconnect from chzuyot, from settlements, if we decide to put emphasis on getting the Orthodox and the Arab population better into the workforce, if we do not continue spending the egregious amounts that we're spending on security in a way that doesn't secure Israel. Iran can still develop a bomb and they can still send it on Jerusalem. The fact that we're not preventing that, we don't have the ability, the U.S. does not have the power to totally prevent risks. Pakistan has a nuclear weapon. Can we guarantee that Pakistan will not use it against us? And nevertheless, we are not addressing the issues that are affecting the real Israeli, the difficult situation where Israelis can no longer live in the center, can no longer buy apartments, can no longer rent apartments, can no longer receive normal medical treatment, a decent standard of education. Where we were in education 20, 30 years ago, we were top of the charts when you compare country to country. And there's, I'm really
But
pessimistic.
Is pessimistic, you are too.
Very pessimistic.
Okay, Phyllis.
I think the Middle East is on fire. I think that the barbarians are at our gates in America, and we're living in very post-Orwellian, linguistically speaking times, so that Americans are not allowed to understand what is happening in terms of jihad and terrorism. And Israel seems to be at the beating heart of this. It's not going to be spared the danger to civilians that civilians everywhere now face, and they face it because of Islamic jihad and because of an ideology that is ruthless and barbaric and misogynistic. And the countries that support, that fund this jihad are countries that the American president has been reaching out to appease and to negotiate with. And this is very troubling, and I agree that this is a difficult, dangerous, dark time.
Interesting. Wrap it up for us.
Wow, I am not in agreement. I firstly am an optimistic person in general, and I see conflict as, and the world and our issues as the glass is half full. I think that Israelis are enormously resilient. I think that they are enormously happy. I think that they have an attitude towards life, which is David Broza's great song, Yeh Tov. I think that that's one of the great elements of who they are. I do not think that this is the worst time in Israel's history in its relationships to the United States. If anyone remembers the Shamir years, it was really bad, and that was with the Republican presidency. And it's very, very important for us to give that into context. I believe and know full well that there will be bumpy paths between the United States and Israel. I also know full well that the Jewish community is not as connected as it once was to Israel. And that troubles me and worries me also. But I can tell you one thing for sure. Israel is a player on the world stage. And whether or not the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel like one another is not going to diminish that. We're not going into isolationism. We're not going into craziness, because the reality is that Israel not only influences, has an impact on, but actually literally and truly has changed the world. And that's not going to stop because of the election that took place recently. Israel is a player. The United States is a player. They don't always play nicely together, but they're still on the same stage.
I cannot thank the four of you enough. You know, I'm trying very hard to help JBS make a contribution to Jewish life. The four of you are fabulous. And you don't get to hear this. Phyllis, you don't get to hear this kind of discussion anywhere. So Jonathan, it is always wonderful to sit with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Phyllis, you're a gem. You just keep writing, you keep working. I don't know how you do it all, but you keep doing it all. Oren, it's the first time we've met. It's been an honor to meet you. I want you in this chair very, very often. Thank you.
Thank you.
my friend.
Thank you very much.
And Micah, you're the best in the world. Thank you so much for being here. Phyllis Chesler, Oren Heiman, Jonathan Mark, Micah Halpern. Extraordinary conversation. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to anything you heard during this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I'd love to read some of your comments on future editions of the program. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.